and welcome to the premiere edition, the maiden voyage of Future Forward. We're going to have kind of a fun, I think, different romp into the world of tech, society, democracy, sociology. And Gene and I know each other a long time, but I thought it would just be fun to start by saying, Gene, tell our newfound podcast audience a little bit about the journey that brings you to today.
Sure. Thanks. And it's great to be here. This is going to be fun. I am a person who was basically brought up and thought I was going to be a writer. English major, went to the University of Virginia, completely bereft of any technology or really even business or marketing training until I hit the road. I came to New York thinking I was going to be a journalist because that's how you make money if you can't become a writer and you're like an English major type. Found out very quickly that magazine business was a long, dreadful slog. And I'm in New York, and I answered a random ad to just be part of a writer for a newsletter, and it turned out to be the beginnings of this company called Jupiter Communications that became a big $100 million company by the end of .com one in the 1990s, had an IPO, and it was kind of produced research, had events, was sort of the tech crunch of its day, combined with, whatever, Business Insider or one of those publications that tracks tech. And our focus was on the consumer and cultural and media business. The world of tech used to be for enterprise computers and corporations to manage better. One of the things that I think we both bring a little bit to this that is unique is from day one back then, distance from the nuts and bolts of technology wasn't the worst thing, because you needed to understand what it was like to be a normal person as industries and medium began to be transformed by the internet. So having gone through about 10 years of that, I have been an investor in some companies since then, have watched some of the hundreds of people that I worked with back in the 90s become CEOs or founders of great companies that we're all familiar with. And I started 3 or 4 additional companies that were not standing on the sideline, but in the world of marketing and media digitally. So one of them is a company called House Party that's still around that does marketing through events in homes using the internet. And I built some really nice but failing, ultimately, mobile apps. And that's probably a good place to stop.
Let me just ask one question.
Yeah.
Today, the people that are analysts seem either distant from the things they look at or almost adversarial. My memory of Jupiter was that it was both an analytical organization, but also, like, in its DNA, excited about what it was witnessing.
Yeah, I that's true. I think that, and it could be that that's a sign of what the times were then. It is now so obvious that the internet is here but I do think if there was any breathlessness to it, it was that you had dozens of areas, some of which we'll be covering, in this podcast, that you knew were going to become spectacularly transformed by the internet, but how it was going to happen, when it was going to happen, by whom, and who had good ideas or bad ideas, was a big deal. So I think there really was. It was a very, very exciting, time. Yeah. And so I think that is part of it. I think that we had to always be careful to bring some skepticism towards things, and I think we were good at that too. We provided a lot of data that people used in their forecasts and financials. But when we look back on it, we underestimated most of what ended up happening rather than being rose-tinted glasses. So rather than me go on, let's transition, because you were there through some of that. We knew each other on and off back then, but let's hear your snapshot.
So, I've done 5 companies. They've all been successful and unsuccessful in different ways, and we'll talk about them kind of as we go along. The last one was a company called Magnify that then became Waywire when we bought Cory Booker's company. that company sold, and I went and spent 5 months at the TED conferences as a TED resident, and am now just really excited about what this next chapter is going to be. And maybe that's a good place to kind of talk about the structure of the podcast. At least at the outset, we imagine it having 3 chunks, 3 chapters. The first one will be very simply today, technology, civics, sociology, what's happening in the week ahead, where I think we'll bring some unique perspectives and to it. And we'll try and stay as best away from politics as we can, except that in some ways everything is political now. And then the second chapter will be tomorrow, what's around the corner, kind of what's kind of coming, what we should pay attention to. And then maybe the one that is going to be the most crystal ball in its nature, talking about the future, things that aren't going to happen in the next day, month, year, maybe even 5, but are going to have kind of profound impacts on the planet and our children's children, and a place where I think you and I may be differ in what we think are going to be the big movers. But
yeah.
So let's just jump right in and talk about today, because the today segment on this podcast is pretty frothy, and it is in fact Wednesday, and Wednesday we are going to see Twitter, Facebook, and Google all hauled before Congress to tell what they know about Russian interference in the U.S. elections. And there's one version of Wednesday that has it pretty boring. Bunch of lawyers, bunch of congressmen, bunch of senators. And there's another version that has it kind of explosive. Gene, what do you think? Are we going to have fireworks?
Well, I think there probably will be some. There are so many little micro issues and areas around this that I think something could bubble up out of nowhere, an offhand statement, whatever. So that notwithstanding, I think that unless there's some news or new information that these guys are going to be bringing, and we might hear a little bit about that, I think this is going to be about learning how the sausage is made on the other side of the fence. I think that people and politicians even, I see no sign that they understand what really happens that takes a piece of information and puts it, by paying for it or not paying for it through social, all the way out into a Facebook news feed and then metastasizing out beyond there. And we don't know, and I think that it's both more complex than people realize, and it's drop dead simple because it's still a tiny little bit wild west, and people are making it up as they go along. So, but I want to hear what you're thinking, because a lot of this has to do with the meat of what they present.
So I've seen some of what they're going to present, and without giving away confidential sources, that I will only tell you that I think it's far more shocking than people realize. And I think that in some ways Facebook, Google, and Twitter all have a vested interest in waking people up to the nature of what Russia is trying to do to social media, how they're using it, and how much bigger a problem it is than any one of these institutions can solve on their own.
I ask you a follow-up, but in the terms of bigger, are they aware? There's a part of me that finds it hard to believe anything is true other than that Zuckerberg and everyone else have been colossally naive about the influence and the impact, or what it means to actually have news flowing through your system when you don't think you're a media company. Is it that, or do they feel like they're going to wake people up because this is just stuff they've known?
No, I don't think they knew. I think they really believed that they were a platform and that their job was to simply be objective, and that if anyone had a problem, they could flag it, and if it was flagged, it would be looked at, and then it would be taken. I think that you're seeing all of these organizations, somewhat begrudgingly make the march from, a DCMA protected platform that literally says we don't touch anything until someone complains, to, we're publishers. They're not going to say those words, but they're sure thinking like publishers.
Well, look, I either that part of it is either naivete or or kind of selective we're a media company ism, because how could you run YouTube and not understand at some point you're not just like a cable carrier or a telephone company? How, with what Zuckerberg has said and wanted to say, and the very fact that they decided to call that central part of our Facebook page your news feed, it's really interesting. So, but I also do believe they don't know any better. They didn't realize, these people haven't been schooled in some of this stuff.
So here's the wild card for Wednesday. It's all lawyers presenting. There's no, Sheryl Sandberg. There's no Mark Zuckerberg. So there's lawyers are going to tend to be very conservative and low key. But here's the wild card. It's Devin, among the Senate and the House, which is a joint committee. It's Devin Nunes's committee, and he hasn't been on the front page of the paper for 2 weeks. And I think that he may decide to grandstand.
Right, and what grandstanding mean for him in terms of being deeply divisive?
We'll know on Wednesday, and anyway, it's a good question, and one that I think brings us happily forward.
Yep.
So next up, let's talk about kind of where we're going to be around the corner, and that I think, I have been remarkably bipolar about the iPhone 10.
Yeah.
I wrote.
You've been using it?
No one's seen it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. The iPhone 10. Yeah.
Yeah, no, not the 8.
What you hear? Yeah. And what are the goods and the bads that, from your point of view, or is it just more of a today I'm feeling like it's going to bomb?
Well, no. I mean, I wrote a piece for Media Post back in September in which I said the iPhone 10 was going to be the starting bell of the AR, VR, particularly AR world, and I was absolutely sure. And then there were all these supply chain issues, and they missed deadlines, and they're not going to deliver enough phones and all this other stuff. And then I got very pessimistic about it, and sad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you think that we're entering a stage where the needs, where the disparate needs for horsepower, specific hardware capabilities, or merely even attention, is kind of pulling this apart a little? I mean, one of the things that I feel like has happened in the last few phones is that some of the basics have kind of fallen a little on the wayside. Notorious problems with mics, with audio input on some of the iPhones. A lot of false positives on battery life, and then the compatibility issues. I mean, this thing is just crazy. The microphone dongle that they've been using, and combined with Bluetooth, is it stable for this stuff? It makes it really hard.
So just so we can define for our audience what level of psychosis each of us has on this topic.
Yeah,
I can answer it in a really simple question. Right. Thursday morning, 3 a.m. Were you sleeping?
Yes. Yes.
And I was up.
Yeah, and you were up. Yeah, it's and it's, by the way, one might wonder, why would we care one way or the other? Does it level the playing field for them to trip up a little? Is it really bad news? And I think it is bad news. I think this stuff needs to, be pushed along and move along. And I think there's real issues here. So
by the time we record our next podcast, I will be holding an iPhone 10, and I will give you my initial reaction, and it better walk on fucking water is all I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big issue is they haven't had a quantum leap forward on a new phone in a while that I really recognize. It's a little bit here, a little bit there, and I'm not really sure, what happens at this point. So,
all right. So with that, we move to the next big thing. So this is the future question, and it's the one that's the most controversial, and I think potentially the most disturbing. Do you believe? I mean, first of all, do we believe, and then what does it mean if we end up finding out that the use of mobile devices is by clinical standards addictive?
Yeah, I can't speak from clinical in a precise way because that might be something that's hard to pin down anyway. But I take it as, by definition, that both smartphones and social media are deeply addictive, or at least the behaviors and the outcomes are reflective of addictive people, being involved and stuff going a little haywire. So I do think that's an issue. And as a parent of 2 teenage girls and a 9-year-old son who's just on the edge of this stuff, it's a big issue. It's a big issue about, how negative is this? And is it so negative it outweighs the positives, if there are positives, in having these phones in our lives?
Is it possible that we're at like the John Wayne era of cigarette smoking, where like cowboys smoke cigarettes and everyone on TV and everyone in the movies smokes cigarettes, and handsome men smoke cigarettes, and we're like even though the tobacco companies at that point probably already knew that there was a health impact, like are we really, like is that the journey we're on?
I used to think until very recently both no, and it's going to feel like that might be happening forever, but that's not an issue. But I say it that way because I'm in a little bit of a pause mode, because I have seen some evidence that something could be done, and I think that's more important than are we heading off a cliff, because if there's nothing we could do about it, there's nothing you could say, because it's not like it's going away. It's easy to say those people need to be responsible for their own lives or the lives of their children, and then that's the way it needs to be managed. I do feel like this idea of putting the phone down, it's been hotly debated at my girls' high school. Should they drop their phones in a box before they even enter the school or into each classroom? There are companies now that have whole parts of their day or meetings without them, or have a new rule that you're not even allowed to send emails on the weekend. You go do all your work, but have it queued up to hit 9 a.m. because it's an offense to people to think that they should be so plugged in that they're not answering something within 4 hours when they're not officially working. Anyway, I just float a few of those things because I think that's the meat of what is going to really matter here. If any of you that read the both New York Times and Atlantic magazines, respectively, have had cover stories recently, the Times far superior, mostly about the effects on teenagers.
I was in a college classroom the other day. It was a big auditorium-style professor, and from the back of the room, which was where I was standing, you could see all the laptops open and all the screens. And it was, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but they were not researching the topic that was being presented by the professor. They were, on Instagram or whatever the equivalent there are, Facebook.
And by the way, the issue with that also is it goes back again to people being well-intentioned but clueless. It's so easy to trick a 50-something-year-old, teacher that knows much less about the technology and internet than his, quote-unquote inmates. So, gosh, it's hard to figure out how you navigate around this stuff. But I'm not surprised at all. If they're going to be in the classrooms or in the schools, there will be rampant non-academic uses.
But just to be optimistic for a moment, what about the argument? What about the optimistic argument that really what's changed is that people are able to be we all multitask, and that's actually a sign of agile intelligence that we can do, read and look and scan and forward and link, and that's actually that's the human, becoming more mature.
Look, I completely agree with that, and one of the things you'll hear from me a lot, which is the internet is ground zero for the word and. In any one of these situations, you will find that there is an equal and opposite phenomena going on all the way to the limit. So I am by no means skeptical or cynical net about smartphones. In fact, I probably bend a little on the positive side, and I agree with those. Even some of those classroom issues you're talking about, it's going to be about figuring out how to educate people to make some of these decisions themselves, or in institutional environments like schools or corporations, or maybe in public spaces. Sometimes I think that maybe the technology and some imaginative solutions can help out. Can you freeze? Can each classroom be its own little China, where you can only allow access to certain things within those classrooms or within that IP address? Who knows?
I am one of the proud owners of a collector's item called Google Glass, and I remember when it was first presented on stage, and the presentation was, we're all walking around like this. We shouldn't be staring down at our phones. This was, I guess, 3 years ago, 4.
Right. It was.
And I bought Google Glass believing that this idea of a data layer that would float in front of me was better than staring at a thing. And, Google Glass was, obviously a failure by any measure. But, one of the things that I guess I keep thinking optimistically is there is coming some kind of a device or a pair of glasses or a heads-up display that will make it possible for me to be both seeing related information and not having to not look at people. But I'm always looking. I was at a conference yesterday and I looked at 100 booths worth of technology, and there wasn't a damn thing that made me think anyone had figured it out yet.
Yeah, I think some of the technology barriers are not up to snuff on what our imagination or even some real designs are going to be. I think that one of the things you'll hear on this podcast from you and I, because we've been living it for 20 years, is well before anything is realistic or plausible, we're able to kind of there are things we won't know. Nobody knew what a hashtag was ever going to be. But, the idea of point-to-point communications, everyone's a publisher, these kinds of things. And I think that there just isn't enough horsepower to deliver those kinds of solutions yet, but it's easy to think about what they might be like. And I think it's going to be amusing to watch people like Snap make the same mistake we've all made historically, which is to think that it's 18 months around the corner when it's 7 years.
Yeah, if you get the so let's do this, because we've got about 2 minutes left in this particular podcast. Let's just try an experiment. I'll throw 3 words at you, and you give me a 1-sentence answer, and then you can throw 3 words at me.
Okay, sure.
And they're not going to be the ones you think.
Okay.
Comcast.
Media company that has arrived there from cable.
Yeah. All right. I get 2 more, and then it's your turn. You can get me back. Harvey Weinstein.
Blight on humanity.
Last one. Best book you've read recently.
Oh, best book I've read recently. I'll go a little low tech, but tech on that, which is the audio book of Lincoln and the Bardo. Unbelievable, spectacular. Shows you a whole new category that can be out there.
All right, and we'll put a link to that in the comments section of the podcast.
Right.
All right. Now that I've so your turn.
Try.
Yeah.
Broadband.
Old news.
All right, let's put a pin in that because I want to talk about that at some point. GPS.
Oh, that's a good one. So I've gone from all kinds of concerns about privacy, and I don't want the cloud to know where I am and all, to being, as I become more connected to technology and more of an active user of it, pretty much from morning till I shut off the lights, I let more and more apps know where I am, and I expect that information to deliver back to me value and not creepiness. So far, I have not had a Minority Report moment. So far.
All right, I like that.
Tick.
That's a good answer. Okay, the third one I'll give you is fact checking.
So I get to do a little promo. So this week my TED Talk on fake news comes out, and I'm going to piss off my journalist friends by saying this, but I'm just not sure I know what facts are anymore.
Really? All right. I mean, that's we could put a pin in that one for the future too. Because
I used to know what facts were.
I would feel terrible and really sad if truth was lost forever. If facts, there are some things that are just facts. And although I think I know where you're going or where you're coming from to say that, but boy, that's a big one. And we could have some great guests to talk about some of this stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, this has been great. Fabulous first half hour. And
yep. Be kind to us. We'll get better.
And tweet us at #FutureForward. We want to hear your comments. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, or you just want to, I would say we're open to AMA. Ask us anything. We're here, and we will be back again next week. See you next week.
Bye-bye.